The sun hung low over the Arizona desert, heavy and cruel, turning the land into a sea of fire. Eli Ward squinted against the glare as he guided his horse through the parched flats, the saddle creaking beneath him. He was a man of few words, a cowboy worn by years of dust and silence. The cattle had scattered in the last storm, and he'd been riding 3 days straight without luck. His canteen was nearly dry, and the heat gnawed at his bones. Still, something in him, stubborn or fateful, pushed him onward through the shimmering haze. As the wind shifted, a faint sound reached him, a cry thin and broken, like the voice of the dying earth itself. Eli pulled his reins, scanning the horizon. Nothing but sand, stone, and the endless blue. He almost turned back when he heard it again, softer this time, almost swallowed by the wind. Without another thought, he kicked his horse forward, following the sound toward a jagged outcrop of rock where the earth dipped low. That's when he saw her. Small, motionless, a child barely clinging to life beneath a dying mesquite tree. Eli slid from his horse and rushed to her side. The girl's face was streaked with dust, her dark hair tangled with cactus thorns, her skin burned by the sun, lips cracked open like dry riverbeds. She was breathing, barely. He uncorked his canteen and let a few drops touch her tongue. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and endless like the desert night. She whispered a single word, trembling on her breath. "Nalina?" Eli frowned, not understanding. "Easy now," he murmured. "You're safe." But the word lingered in his mind long after. He wrapped her in his old trail coat and lifted her into the saddle. The girl weighed almost nothing, bones and sorrow in his arms. As they rode toward his cabin, Eli could feel her pulse faint against his chest, fragile yet alive. The desert stretched out endlessly, but he kept his eyes on the distant ridge, pushing through fatigue. When they reached his land by dusk, the sky burned orange and violet. He carried her inside, laid her gently on his bed, and stoked the fire until warmth filled the single-room cabin. Night fell hard and silent. The child stirred once, murmuring something in Apache before drifting into feverish sleep. Eli sat beside her, rubbing his temples. He'd helped lost travelers before, but something about this girl unsettled him. It wasn't fear, he'd faced that plenty. It was the way the shadows seemed to move when she breathed, the way the wind outside moaned like a woman crying. He told himself it was just the desert, but when the fire crackled, he could have sworn he heard footsteps outside. Eli rose and stepped to the door, rifle in hand. The moon hung low, lighting the canyon edge. Nothing moved except the tumbleweeds rolling across the sand. Yet there was a scent, smoke, sage, and something faintly floral like the ghost of rain. He shook his head, muttered, "I'm losing it," and went back inside. The girl shivered, and he draped another blanket over her. Her lips moved, whispering that same name again, Nalina. This time her voice was softer, almost tender. Eli stared into the fire and repeated the name under his breath. It felt heavy, ancient, and full of sorrow. By morning, the storm clouds had gathered over the horizon. The girl slept soundly for the first time, her small hand clutching the edge of his blanket. Eli rode out to fetch more water from the stream, uneasy but resolute. He had no idea who she belonged to or where she'd come from, but leaving her wasn't an option. As he filled his pail, he caught sight of something strange on the opposite bank, ashes still faintly warm. Someone had camped there recently, and not long ago. He scanned the canyon, but the wind gave no answers. Back at the cabin, the girl was awake, sitting upright with wary eyes. She didn't speak, only watched him closely, her expression unreadable. "You hungry?" Eli asked, handing her a piece of bread. She hesitated, then nodded slightly, eating in silence. "You said a name," he continued gently. "Nalina, who's that?" The girl looked toward the window, where the wind brushed against the glass, and whispered, "My mother." Her voice cracked on the word, heavy with grief. Eli said nothing. He just nodded and let her finish the bread, pretending not to notice the tears she tried to hide. That night, the storm broke. Rain pounded the tin roof, wind howling like wolves. The girl stirred restlessly, murmuring in her sleep. Eli sat by the fire again, staring into the flames. Every few minutes he thought he saw her shadow move, stretching, rising, forming the outline of a woman beside the hearth. He blinked, and it was gone. But when lightning flashed outside, the shape appeared again, reflected in the window. A woman's silhouette, long hair flowing, standing among the rain. Eli's breath caught in his throat. "Who's there?" He called out, but the only answer was the wind's mournful cry. Unable to shake the feeling, he walked to the window, peering into the darkness. The desert was alive with sound, the rustling of sagebrush, the distant rumble of thunder, and beneath it all, a whisper. A voice, soft, melodic, heartbroken, calling a name he didn't know. Eli stepped back, heart pounding. He turned to see the girl wide awake, staring at the same window. "She's here," she whispered. "My mother." The firelight flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. Eli swallowed hard. "Ain't nobody here but us, kid." But deep down, even he didn't believe that. When dawn finally broke, the air was cool and still. The storm had passed, leaving the desert fresh and golden. Eli stepped outside, exhaustion in his bones. The sky stretched wide and endless, but something felt changed, as if the world itself had shifted. On the sand near the door, he saw footprints, bare, delicate, leading away from the cabin and vanishing into the dunes. He looked back inside. The girl was still asleep. The prints hadn't been hers. Eli stared at them for a long time before whispering into the wind, "Nalaina," and for a fleeting moment he thought he heard an answer. That morning, Eli saddled his horse but didn't ride out. Instead, he sat on the porch, watching the desert come alive in the light. The girl stepped outside quietly, still wrapped in his coat. "She was here," she said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Eli nodded. "I reckon she was." The girl took his hand, small and fragile in his calloused palm. "She says thank you." Eli's throat tightened, and he couldn't speak. The girl turned toward the wind and smiled faintly. In that moment, Eli understood. Whatever bound them now wasn't by chance. It was something older, something that would never fade. And as the desert sun climbed higher, Eli Ward, a cowboy once known only by his loneliness, finally felt the weight in his heart lift. The girl beside him wasn't just a lost child. She was the bridge between two worlds, one living and one gone. And somewhere beyond the shimmering dunes, a spirit watched in peace, her sorrow carried away by the morning wind. Weeks passed, and the girl began to heal under the soft rhythm of desert days. Eli would wake before sunrise, tend to the horses, and find her sitting by the window, tracing shapes in the dust with her small fingers. She rarely spoke, but her eyes followed him everywhere, as though searching for something only she could see. He taught her how to gather wood, mend ropes, and hum old trail songs. When she smiled for the first time, faint and fleeting, it startled him more than any gunshot could. The cabin, once silent, now breathed again. At night, when the wind whispered through the cracks of the old cabin, Eli dreamed. In his sleep, he saw a fire burning alone in the desert, a figure of a woman in black kneeling beside it. Her hair flowed like a shadow, her face half hidden in tears. He would reach out, but before he could speak, the wind would carry her voice, soft, mournful, calling a name he didn't know. Then he'd wake, breath shallow, the embers of his own fire glowing low, and feel as though someone had just walked through his soul. One morning, as he poured water into a tin cup, the girl spoke the first full sentence he'd heard from her since that night. "She's my mother," she whispered, eyes fixed on the open doorway that led to the desert. "She watches you." Eli froze, the ladle still in his hand. The words carried no fear, only a strange peace. "Your mother's gone, child," he said gently. But she shook her head. "Not gone. She waits." Her small hand lifted toward the horizon, where the sand shimmered like heat-born ghosts. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Eli stepped outside. The sky bled red and gold, the desert stretching endless and quiet. He felt her before he saw her, the presence that made the air turn colder, the silence heavier. There, by the edge of the mesquite grove, stood the woman from his dreams. Her figure was faint, almost transparent, wrapped in flowing black. Her eyes met his across the distance, dark wells of sorrow and warning. "Take care of her," the wind whispered between them. "She is all that remains of what once was." And then she vanished with the dusk. Eli didn't sleep that night. He sat by the fire, the girl resting nearby, her breathing steady and soft. Every now and then, the flames would shift, forming shadows that danced like memories. He thought of the woman's words, or what he believed were her words. Take care of her. He'd seen plenty of hard years, sickness, death, loneliness, but nothing had ever stirred something so fierce inside him. This child, this fragile soul left behind by a world that no longer cared, had somehow become the reason he still woke each morning. By the next week, the girl had grown stronger. She began helping with chores, feeding the chickens, sweeping the cabin floor, even trying to braid the horse's mane with a patience that made Eli smile. "You've got spirit, kid," he'd say, handing her a piece of cornbread. She'd nod and whisper, "My mother gave it to me." He didn't correct her. Instead, he let her speak of the woman, how she used to sing by the river, how her laughter sounded like rain on stone, and how she promised she'd never really leave. Each story stitched the girl closer to life, but the dreams didn't stop. They grew stronger. Some nights Eli would wake to find the fire still burning, though he hadn't stoked it. Once he heard footsteps outside, soft, deliberate. When he opened the door, the air was still, yet in the sand, clear as truth, were footprints leading away from the cabin. They faded before his eyes. Another night, the girl woke crying, whispering, "She's calling me home." Eli gathered her in his arms, his voice steady, but his heart breaking. "You're home now, little one, right here." The desert wind sighed in reply, carrying with it a whisper of thanks. As the months passed, something in the land itself seemed to change. The river near the cabin ran clearer, and wildflowers grew where before only dust had been. Eli often caught himself staring at the horizon, wondering if Nalina's spirit, he now knew her name, had blessed the place, granting them both a piece of peace she never found in life. The girl, whom he called Taya, laughed freely now, her hair shining like sunlit copper. She would race the wind through the tall grass, barefoot and fearless. And when she did, he swore the desert itself smiled. One evening, as the sun fell behind the red cliffs, Eli saddled his horse and lifted Taya up to ride with him. They followed the trail along the canyon rim, where the world opened wide below. "She used to bring me here," Taya whispered. "Said this is where spirits see everything they love." Eli nodded quietly, his throat tight. When they stopped at the ridge, a warm wind rose from the valley, and for a fleeting second, he saw her again, the woman in black, now standing beside the ghost of a river, her face calm and full of light. Taya didn't see her, but she smiled as though she somehow felt it. "She's happy," she murmured. Eli looked toward the fading vision and whispered, "So am I." As the image faded into twilight, he knew the haunting was over, not because the spirit had gone, but because it had found peace. He had too. Life returned to the cabin. Years passed. Taya grew tall and strong, her laughter echoing through the canyons. Eli grew older, slower, but never lonely again. Every night, he'd sit by the fire and tell her stories of the West, of storms, and of spirits that loved too deeply to leave. One night, long after the child had fallen asleep, Eli stepped outside and looked to the desert one last time. The moon glowed silver over the dunes, painting the world in quiet grace. "She's safe," he whispered into the wind. "I kept my word." And somewhere beyond the horizon, a soft voice, neither near nor far, answered back. "You did well, Eli Ward." The air grew still warm. He tipped his hat to the stars, eyes glistening. When he returned to the cabin, the fire burned brighter than it ever had, its glow steady and alive, like love that refuses to fade. At dawn, the first light spilled across the desert floor. Eli watched it rise with the girl, no longer the lost child he'd found, but a young woman ready to meet the world. She placed her hand over his and whispered, "She's proud of you." He nodded, unable to speak. The desert wind stirred, carrying a soft hum that sounded almost like a lullaby. It wasn't sorrow anymore, it was peace. Together they stood beneath that boundless Arizona sky, two souls mended by love and loss. And though the spirit of Nalina had vanished into light, her heart remained, alive in both of them.